Hello and welcome to Nature Is. What if I told you the future of our economy depends on how well we understand and protect nature? Today we're diving into an initiative reshaping the business world's relationship with the environment. Meet the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, or TNFD. Think of it as nature's equivalent to climate change reporting, but with broader implications. Since 2021, the TNFD has been on a mission to redirect trillions of dollars away from practices that harm nature towards those that help it thrive. Why does it matter? In late 2022, over 190 governments agreed to a game-changing Paris Agreement for nature. The TNFD is the financial world's answer to this call to action. In just 3 years, they've created a roadmap for companies to assess and report their relationship with nature. It's not just about identifying risks, it's about uncovering opportunities. And the business world is taking notice. Over 400 organizations are already on board, representing a staggering $6 trillion in market value. But here's the kicker. While these recommendations are voluntary, they're quickly becoming essential. Investors are demanding transparency, and regulations are on the horizon. The message is clear: adapt or risk being left behind. In today's episode, we'll discuss the TNFD's recommendations and their far-reaching impacts. We'll also tackle the challenges businesses face in this new landscape, from data quality issues to the need for new organizational skills. Get ready to discover how nature is becoming the new bottom line in finance and business, a shift you can't afford to ignore. Thanks for tuning into Nature Is, and enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Nature Is, where we brainstorm, share innovative ideas, and have conversations to stir our spirits and elevate our actions for a better world. Well, let's just jump right in with a really basic question, which is, what is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, known as the TNFD, and why is it important?
So TNFD was created in mid-2021 as a cross-sector initiative, supported by government, backed by science, but a market-led task force. So we're a not-for-profit initiative. Our mission is to bring nature onto the balance sheet and into corporate reporting. Why is it important? It's important because nature loss is accelerating. We need to halt and reverse nature loss, which is now a global public policy goal shared by 190 plus governments. But of course, accelerating nature loss also creates risks to business and finance. Every business in the world has dependencies on nature. And if we don't deal with the nature crisis and we don't manage to restore the resilience of nature, then the resilience of business is going to be compromised. And of course, that will then compromise financial returns to investors and other providers of capital. So we are 100% dependent on nature as societies and as businesses. So I think that really speaks to the mission and the purpose of TNFD.
Well, absolutely. The fact that we don't account for these externalities more robustly is quite incredible. So this work is really immensely important. So if you're approaching this topic as a business executive for the first time, what are the essential concepts that an executive might start with? And are they the same or different from the ways that companies are thinking about climate action?
Yeah, so I think climate's been a difficult journey for a lot of people. If we just go back even 5, maybe 10 years ago, most people were not talking about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, right? So as we take on new challenges, we have to learn a new language and a new way of thinking about these sort of complex challenges that face business and finance and society as a whole. So we've climbed a mountain on a new language system and a construct for making sense of climate change. And now we need to do the same thing for nature. The good news is that in nature, there's this concept of natural capital. And it's actually a language system that's actually really easy for business and finance to make sense of. It's basically nature has a set of stocks, assets, and those stocks provide a flow of benefits into our business models, and into our societies. We've got this language system around natural capital, thinking about nature as a set of assets, and those flows are called ecosystem services into business and into society. And there's actually a nice defined set of those ecosystem services in the science, about 27, 28 identified ecosystem services. So we're talking about a manageable set of things to make sense of, the assets and the flows, and it provides a really nice construct and a sort of a gateway for business and finance to start engaging on this topic. So while a lot of people feel quite intimidated about it, what we've seen at the task force over the last 2.5 years is that once they open that first door and start to look at the language and the science around natural capital, A, it's really interesting, and B, it's actually constructed in a way that's quite easy for non-scientific experts to engage in and start thinking through and analyzing.
Well, having that translation ability, I think, to go from ecologists and biology to boardroom realities is a unique skill set.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's different is on climate change, of course, we've got one atmosphere, and that means we've got the concept of a carbon budget, and we all share that carbon budget, we can measure it, and then it's really an allocation issue around who's going to contribute what to reducing emissions to preserve that carbon budget. On nature, it's a different construct. Of course, while we've got one atmosphere on the climate side, nature is inherently very local. And so there is a limit to how we can take the carbon mindset or the climate mindset that we've all developed and apply that to what I'll call the rest of nature, because of course, climate change is just part of nature, but we've separated the two into different buckets, unfortunately. But we do need to have a slightly different mindset when we think about nature, because everything is local. The impact, the dependencies are highly localized, and that means the risks and the opportunities are also highly localized. There is a way to access this conversation, but we've also got to do some adaptation work in the way we think about climate versus the rest of nature.
Absolutely. And hopefully this means, if I put my former CSO hat on, that companies begin to think about supply chains in different ways, where you have the meta-analysis from a carbon perspective. But if you're having to think about this in a very localized way, it sort of brings the realities to the fore about, supply chain impacts and all of the various ways that a business touches the natural world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and target. How do they work together as a comprehensive framework?
Yeah, so one of the things we did when we started the task force was to explicitly build on the work of the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We've very much taken as much of their approach, their construct and their architecture for climate-related disclosures and reporting as much as we can. So those 4 pillars come directly from TCFD, and I think they really cover the key aspects of what businesses should be thinking about in terms of their resilience to both climate change effects and also the potential risks and opportunities associated with accelerating nature loss. What we've seen in our work across the task force, and you really only appreciate this once you get into it, is that obviously governance decisions and the way governance decision-making is organized in an organization really does have a bearing on how risks are assessed, risk management, and also how strategy is formulated. There is this kind of cascade across the 4 pillars from governance into strategy impacting risk management. And then, of course, the 4th pillar is really a sort of enabling pillar around what are the specific metrics that should be monitored and managed in order to enable the decision-making across those other 3 pillars. So it's all connected, and it's all very consistent with the approach taken by TCFD. So for any companies out there that are already doing TCFD reporting, you're actually incredibly well placed to get started on nature-related reporting using TNFD.
Excellent. Well, I think that's a really helpful way for companies to think about it. And on that note, congratulations. So last week during London Climate Week, it was announced that over 400 companies have committed to starting with TNFD reporting, an incredible accomplishment. So well done. What are, in your opinion, the main drivers that companies and financial institutions are thinking about when they're adopting these principles? And just knowing that there's a little bit of regulatory fatigue by the C-suite of late, why are they embracing this now?
Yeah, well, it's certainly regulation is one of the drivers, but I'd say there are 2 other drivers, and this has really come through in that group of adopters who've already signed on to start making TNFD reporting. So as you said, within less than a year since we published the recommendations in September. We've now got 416 organizations signed on. And it's really interesting talking to them about, well, what was the motivation. The first is talking to some of the early adopters. It's clearly part of their vision and mission and values as a company. And so I think we're seeing companies sign up because they feel it's important to them. It speaks to their values as a company and also to what they're trying to project about their products and services into the market. A good obvious example of that, for example, is B corporations. Companies voluntarily elect to sign up to be a B Corp because it says something about them. And so we're seeing a lot of B Corps obviously take an interest in now demonstrating that and living their values by signing up to TNFD reporting. But I think the other third vector, which is potentially the most significant one we're seeing at the moment, is that companies are responding to growing information needs from their investors and other capital providers. Investors are really realizing as they've come towards this topic that they are holding nature risk in their portfolio today. They just haven't had the tools to see it. In some respects, TNFD quite simply is a tool to identify nature risk in a portfolio in a business. And I think what we're hearing from investors is that they're increasingly realizing there is nature risk in their portfolio today. What we're hearing from universal asset owners is really interesting. One of them said to me last year, there's nowhere to hide from nature risk. We can't diversify this because we're across every sector, in every geography, and across asset classes. So I think as more and more investors realize that nature risk is something they have to tackle head on, they're now going to their investees and expecting and asking for more information around how those companies are managing nature-related issues. So we're seeing nature featuring more in stewardship guidelines, for example, from investors and asset managers. And so I think that's actually right now proving to be a significant motivator for why TNFD's been taken up on a voluntary basis.
Well, when you just point this out, it seems so obvious, but it's also been overlooked for so long. But yeah, when you think about the nature-related financial risks that so many different industries have, it is incredible that we haven't up until now had a more rigorous way of assessing this and then hopefully reversing it. What are some of the roadblocks that you're seeing multinational companies encounter when they're beginning to take action for nature? Are there any things in particular that really rise to the surface when you see companies grapple with this?
I say confidence and capability because a lot of people say, well, we just don't have any nature-related experts on staff. We're still building up our climate team. We're overwhelmed with climate reporting, so can this nature stuff just wait a couple of years? We'll get there, but we're not ready now. And of course, that's a very natural instinct when a new challenge comes along, particularly one that feels pretty unfamiliar like this one. Of course, as human beings, we all relate to nature every day in our lives, so we sort of need to bring that intuitive sense as humans into the workplace and say, well, actually, we do understand nature, and it's not that formidable as an issue to bring into our risk management and our strategy and governance as an organization. But I think there is a real confidence issue. People are feeling overwhelmed with climate reporting. And so a big focus of the task force is to provide an accessible language system and a set of tools that people can use to start building that confidence and awareness. The second one that we hear a lot about is around data and data concerns. What we've learned at the task force is that sometimes those concerns are overstated and a bit overblown. But the reality is there's actually terabytes of nature-related data already out there. It's been collected by scientific organizations for decades in many cases. But I think the bigger issue is that because people are approaching this topic for the first time, they just don't know where to go looking for the data and which data to use and rely on and what's everybody else in my sector doing. So another big part of what TNFD is working on at the moment is helping to make the existing data sets and data sources and tools, analytic tools, more visible and easier to find and access for market participants, recognizing that in many cases they're doing this kind of analysis for the first time. So I'd say those are probably the two consistent themes we hear about sort of challenges to getting started. But we've got a number of initiatives and programs underway to kind of help tackle that. There's a lot of guidance on our website around data tools, and we've got something called the TNFD Data Catalog, which can signpost people to different resources. There are ways to get started, and our website's a good place to start exploring the different data and capability assets that are around.
It's an important point because essentially we don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Starting something and then course correcting is better than not starting at all. And of course, we've had a number of entrepreneurs on Nature Is that are talking about their contributions to the data issue. So it's happening quickly, but I take your point that we need to just begin, and hopefully as a field acknowledge that there can be an openness to when things don't work out, and if that information is shared, then everyone falls forward together and we learn.
Yeah, I think that's right, Lara. And the other thing I'd add is when we hear from the 400 organizations that have already committed to getting started, very few of them are saying we're going to do all 14 TNFD disclosures in the first year, and it's going to cover our direct operations and upstream and downstream. So I think the other thing that sometimes can be portrayed is, well, this is hugely complicated and it's sort of overwhelming. But that's why we've been emphasizing the words getting started. And actually, that's no different from TCFD and what most organizations do on climate. If you go back and look at the data on TCFD reporting from 2017, 2018, most organizations started making 1 or 2 of the 11 recommended disclosures. Even now, the average is only around 6. Now, obviously, for really large organizations with more capabilities, they're able to do more. We provide provisions in our guidance for people to define and articulate the scope of their disclosures. So it can also start on a part of the business. It could start on one supply chain or one business unit or in one geography. The key thing is to start looking at these issues, building up the confidence and the capabilities internally to do the kind of internal assessment work that then eventually leads to public disclosures. This isn't about trying to hit a home run on the first time out on the field. No one's sort of expecting that, and certainly that wasn't what happened on climate-related reporting either.
Exactly. I think thinking about the outcomes, what one can learn, and both from a business perspective, these are insightful pieces of information for companies to have, as well as their contributions. TNFD has really helpfully outlined a framework, the LEAP framework: locate, evaluate, assess, and prepare. For the businesses that are just commencing with that first step, the locate piece, how do you see them commencing with just that component of the locate from the data that they have, or the data guidance that you're able to give on the website?
So LEAP really is the place to start. We've set it up so that people can become familiar with those core concepts around natural capital and then start exploring the LEAP process. And it's, as you just described, it's broken into 4 phases, and then it's broken into 16 component parts. We don't describe it as step by step because we recognize some people might start in different places. So for example, asset managers might start more in the E phase rather than the L phase. So to your question around locate analysis, what we found is really big asset managers with very diverse portfolios, the location piece might be less relevant in the first glance because they might be looking more through a sector lens. But for a company, as opposed to a financial institution, we think that the first step is really to figure out where is our business or our supply chain interfacing with nature. And really the foundational step, and I have to say it's one that we were a bit surprised has proven to be quite difficult for a lot of organizations, is the first step is to assemble your own asset registry and asset location data internally. So even before you start looking at nature-related data, the first thing is to know where all of your assets are in the business and where they might be geographically located, and therefore what are the type of natural ecosystems they might interface with. But a lot of companies have told us that even just assembling their own internal asset location data is quite a big challenge. So I think that's one of the first steps that we've heard back from people saying we've struggled to get through the locate phase because we've got a lot of homework we've got to do internally around our own asset location data. When you've got that data in place, the next thing is, well, what are the types of ecosystems where we're interfacing? You might have operations, direct operations or supply chain relationships in, say, a rainforest, which will be very different than if it's in a savanna or a marine coastal ecosystem. It's then really important to understand what's the type of ecosystem where our business is operating. And again, we provide guidance on how to figure out what those ecosystems are. There are lots of geospatial mapping tools available to help people quickly do that. So that's really the foundation stone around where does the business interface with nature. But you need those 2 things to come together. You need asset location data internally, and then you need to understand the basic ecosystems where those assets are located.
And I can imagine companies are probably quite surprised when they realize how little they know about this aspect of their business. And so that alone is probably quite useful. Thinking about safeguarding against independent verification, because the TNFD is voluntary right now. And as we just discussed, like, starting somewhere is better than not starting. But is there also a balance in this system of self-disclosure that prevents any greenwashing, if you will, so that the criticisms that might follow from that kind of initial approach are balanced?
I think the first thing to be clear about is TNFD is not a standard. We're a set of recommendations like TCFD. So our objective is to influence the voluntary and eventually mandatory reporting standards that companies respond to. Our goal is to put forward recommendations, and obviously companies, as we're seeing now, are taking up those recommendations while they wait for the standards to be further developed by organizations like the ISSB, but also on the impact side by GRI. And the good news is that work is well underway. The ISSB has signaled that it's going to start working on nature-related standards, drawing on the TNFD recommendations. So I think if we think about the glide path over the next couple of years, we are going to have nature-related reporting standards, which will be a lot more specific. And of course, companies in over 130 jurisdictions use those standards. In the US, for example, we've seen the SEC put forward climate disclosure standards. And so logical to think that there'll be an extension of those beyond climate at some point in the future. So I think that's a really important piece, which is that TNFD informing the standards, but the standards will be what business and financial institutions end up reporting on. It's obviously not up to an organization like TNFD to be the policeman, and we don't evaluate reports. It's not our job to opine on whether a statement that's been issued is a good one or a bad one, whether it fully complies or partially complies. At the end of the day, those judgment calls are left to investors to make, and it's up to investors as the user of the reports to assess for themselves whether the information that's been provided is decision useful to them as a capital provider. We're already seeing investors asking more and more questions, as I mentioned before, of the companies that they're investing in. So rather than seeing this as a compliance exercise, I would really encourage companies to see this as a tool to get better prepared for those questions that are coming from investors, because every company wants to be able to maintain its investor base and it needs to be able to answer those questions from investors. TNFD is really a tool to satisfy those queries from investors, but it's up to investors at the end of the day really to judge the quality of the disclosure reports. And then, of course, being public statements, they're subject to scrutiny by regulators, by the media, and by others. And I think that's where there'll be the natural checks and balances around any claims which can't be substantiated.
Yeah, I think the helpful piece of those realities is that everyone's a little bit more vigilant and thinking about this than maybe we were years back. And as you say, this inevitable alignment with the TCFD, well, already the TCFD, but with GRI and SASB and others, I think begins to just compact it all in a way that is relatable. So that's a helpful framework.
Yeah, and the other piece of the puzzle that's coming into focus later this year is assurance standard. So the IAASB is working on a sustainability assurance standard. I believe it's going to be out in the next few months. And so as TNFD, we'll be looking at building on top of that and saying, well, what might be the nature-specific guidance that we would add? Because, of course, most companies want to make sure that they can be making those public statements with confidence and have some sort of assurance behind them provided by a third-party assurance provider. So again, I think the architecture to support robust corporate reporting is still evolving, but I'm encouraged that it's moving quite fast and it's coming together. And I think we'll be in quite a different place in 12, 18 months time from now as we are now from 12 or 18 months ago.
The good news is we're learning.
We're learning, and there's a lot of actors, and I think we're all pointing in the same direction now. So there's a huge focus on interoperability and making sure that all these pieces are coming together in a way that reduces the cost and compliance burden on companies, but also provides a robust outcome in terms of the information that's being published and put forward, making sure that it's relevant, that it's decision useful and not extraneous. And I don't think anyone is trying to overwhelm companies with publishing, 1,000-page sustainability reports full of information that has no real value to any of the intended audiences. We're certainly being very focused on what's relevant, what's decision useful, and what can be assured to provide companies with that confidence that they can report the data and put it out into the public domain with some confidence.
Absolutely. So one last techie question, and then we can sort of move into to a couple of the lighter ones. How is TNFD approaching this concept of materiality in determining nature-related risks? How do you think about that specifically?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's been one we've grappled with a lot. Of course, it's a hotly debated topic. We just took a very pragmatic approach, to be honest, Lara. We said, well, it's not our job to dictate the materiality requirements of report preparers. That's up to the report preparers themselves, and everyone's circumstances are different. Our job is to provide a tool that works for whatever their preference is. So, I think as we think about how the materiality debate is evolved, clearly Europe has now embraced double materiality and black and white law, but most other jurisdictions still operate on a single materiality view of the world. As much as I don't like the notions of single and double, it is helpful shorthand, so I'll use it here. But with financial materiality or double materiality, I think that we just live in a world now where there are different approaches in operation. And so our job at the task force was to build something that could work for different contexts. I often use the analogy of a piece of tech software as an app. We weren't going to build an app that worked on Apple devices and not Android devices. We wanted to build something that worked on both platforms. So that's how we've approached it. We use the phrase that TNFD's approach to materiality enables the materiality preferences of the report preparer. And I think we've successfully done that. So if you're an organization doing financial materiality only, maybe in the US or in Australia or somewhere else, you can use the TNFD toolkit to help you figure out your financial materiality. Equally, if you're subject to CSRD, you can use the TNFD to look at things through an impact materiality lens. And I think the LEAP approach is designed to help you identify both issues that might be material on against an impact materiality lens as well as a financial materiality lens. So the tools are there. It's up to companies to decide what their approach is and what they're going to be putting out in the public domain.
Well, when you have to design a system and a framework and recommendations that are going to fit into so many different countries and industries, this seems like a very pragmatic and straightforward approach, and I think it's really clarifying for a lot of individuals that will be listening. So the last couple questions here, as our time draws to a close, if you could wave a magic wand and remove the barriers that companies are facing, what would they be and why?
I don't know if I'd call it a magic wand, but I think what we are trying to do is now explore the idea of a global nature data facility to radically change and improve the access to nature-related data. That could be quite transformational. If we can make access to high-quality, assurable data easier, then I think we're really removing one of the potential impediments to market adoption. And I don't just mean the recommendations and making public disclosures. The bigger challenge here is to get every business in every sector, in every geography, thinking about nature as a strategic risk management issue. Even a small family-owned farming operation has a huge number of nature-related dependencies in its business. Think about soil quality or rainfall or the toxicity of the soil through fertilizer use and other things. We've got to change the positioning of nature from being a corporate social responsibility issue to a strategic risk management issue. So for me, that mindset shift underpins everything. If we can improve access to data and improve the confidence that which business thinks about nature as a strategic risk management issue, I think we'll see a real sea change in the way all of us just reposition nature as its relationship to business, because unfortunately we have for hundreds of years treated it as an endless supplier of free resources into our business models. And the planet is telling us increasingly that it is not going to continue to provide those inputs, those ecosystem services at the volumes that we want reliably forever. So we have to start treating it differently. So the magic wand would be to sort of, change everyone's mindset about business and nature and the relationship between the two. But I think the way to do that is actually to make the data easier to understand, because, most people in business are very data oriented. So if we can use data to speak, that's probably the way to change the mindset.
Absolutely. I think that's right. And just this awareness of humans being nature, the dependencies on nature, it's strangely absent from day-to-day lives. And just making that fundamental shift, I think, is crucial to the broader work that TNFD is doing. So for the listeners and others, what can we do to help advance TNFD's work? What is needed right now?
Well, I think there are a number of ways to participate in our work. The first is we have something called the TNFD Forum, which is a broad platform that anyone can join, any business, any organization can join. That's a great way to follow our progress, to signal support for our mission and the importance of this work. But it gives people access to webinars, newsletters, and various other things. So it's a great educational tool. So I think the first thing everyone can do is sort of take the time to get smart on how nature is relevant to your business or to your financial institution, your investment portfolio. And it really starts with one simple question, which is asking, sitting around maybe with some colleagues over a cup of coffee and asking the question, how are we dependent on nature? How's our business dependent on nature? How's our investment portfolio dependent on nature? Because it's dependencies that are the pathway to risk to the organization. And if you think about our dependencies, then it automatically leads us to think about, well, how do we reduce those dependencies, which typically means taking action on the impact we're having on nature. So dependencies and impacts are very related. So I'd say, think about joining the TNFD Forum and getting on the curve and upskilling yourself and your organization. And then I think the next step is really to spread the word and encourage people to use tools like the LEAP approach that we published, to start taking, your team and your organization through a stage-by-stage approach of really starting to understand these issues in a bit more detail. How are they relevant to you? How might your business be disrupted in 12 months or 3 years or 5 years' time? What might be the consequences for your financial performance, for your employees, for your investors, for your brand? How are consumer expectations shifting? There's an aspect of this that we're all in this to help halt and reverse nature loss as citizens, but I wouldn't shy away from encouraging people to also look at this through a self-interested lens and say, well, this is just good. This is going to be smart for the business, or smart investing if I'm aware of these issues and starting to take practical action around how nature might be relevant to the future of our business or future of our investment portfolio.
Well, and on the back of that, I'm cognizant that we've been thinking about risks, but there must be opportunities too that you're seeing companies grasp as well. Just on the flip side of that, maybe it's as a result of looking at this through a risk lens. But are there a few examples of the opportunities that have been these light bulb moments that companies or financial institutions have recognized?
Yeah, there are, and we have overwhelmingly been talking about risk, but I think actually the opportunity side of the equation is more exciting and potentially more transformational. So it's something that as the task force we're working on more this year. Obviously, our first order of business was to develop a risk management framework, so we've done that now, and that's out. My sense is there's quite a bit of confusion in the market right now about all the different terms that are floating around: nature-based solutions, nature climate solutions, biodiversity credits. Nature as infrastructure. So there's a lot of exciting concepts, green bonds, blue bonds, and a lot of people showcasing sort of early stage projects. But I think if we're honest, the big money is still sitting on the sidelines. Pension funds, big institutional investors. The ticket size for nature-related investment opportunities is still generally very, very small. And so I think we're right at the beginning of a really exciting period where we need to bring the scientists together with the structured finance folks to figure out what are those investment models that could go to scale so we can start to make nature an investable asset class. You and I were talking, Larry, before we started this podcast about biomimicry. We're seeing, urban planners and product designers being inspired by nature in terms of better designed products. There's a lot of momentum building now around circular economy. particular bio-circular economy, so we can start thinking about how we can use biopolymers and entirely new nature-based products as the building blocks for the products in our society. There are interesting examples from, say, insurance, with parametric insurance for coral reef protection, where the minute a cyclone hits, the funds are made available for people to go in and do, immediate reef restoration. So I think there's a lot of innovation. We're right at the beginning of it, so I'm hugely excited about what's to come. What's going to be helpful is spending time, and we need to bring the innovators to the table to create those scalable investment models so we can start getting bigger pools of money into this problem, because we've got a $700 billion a year funding gap, and we know governments alone can't meet that problem. Private sector capital is going to be absolutely essential. And so I think that's the challenge, but it's also a very exciting opportunity.
This is always our last question, which you just alluded to biomimicry, and that's been such an important red thread throughout this series, is thinking about how we are always learning from nature. And I know that you also just had a biomimicry immersion.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that probably shifted your thinking a little bit, but if you were to opine on where you feel most at home in the natural world, what would that be? Where do you draw some of your inspiration to keep up this great work?
Well, there are so many great places. There are two that are particularly important to me. One is west of Sydney in Australia, where I grew up, in a place called the Blue Mountains, where I particularly love hiking through the Blue Mountains, where we've got sort of subtropical pockets of rainforest tucked in amongst the mountains, which is pretty special. The other place that's special to me is an island in Puerto Rico, where my wife is from. Pristine beaches, snorkeling, and it's a very, very special place. Bioluminescent bays, microorganisms in the water lighting up at night. So it really does speak to the magic of nature for me, and I'm looking forward to being back there in a couple of weeks' time.
Excellent. Well, we have to find ways to re-energize and remember why we do this work. So Tony, thank you so much for your time today, for the work you do in the world, for the work that the Secretariat is doing alongside you, and congratulations on the great accomplishments of bringing so many businesses along. We look forward to following your continued progress and impact.
Thanks so much, Laura.